Let me introduce our keynote at the moment. I became acquainted with Aaron Harris in my study of AI and what does it mean to finance and trying to figure out where is this community going. Aaron's fairly prolific in his writing on the subject. Aaron, his role is the Senior Vice President, Head of Engineering and Technology for Sage Intacct and one of its founders. Aaron has more than 20 years of high-tech engineering experience in business applications and software development strategies. From Sage Intacct's earliest days, Aaron has led the company's product vision and technology direction. A pioneer in cloud computing, Aaron helped Intacct build the world's first cloud architecture delivering on-demand financial applications. He regularly contributes to the development of best practices for cloud computing, service-oriented architecture, platform as a service, and accounting and finance technology standards. Prior to launching Intacct, Aaron was a member of Arthur Andersen's Developers Coordination Council, where he evangelized emerging development technologies, established best practices, and built infrastructure software development tools focusing on remote data access and web service technologies. Aaron holds a master's degree in information systems and a Bachelor of Science in Accounting from BYU. Aaron.
Thank you. Good morning. We're going to see how dexterous I am here. Can you guys hear me? Is it going through? Did you turn it off?
Yeah, sorry.
Test. Test. Inspires a lot of confidence when a CTO can't advance the slides, right? So what if I ask you to advance? All right, so let me just start off by letting you know this is not a sales presentation. So when I talk about Sage Intacct, it's only to give you some reference for my years learning about accounting technology and sort of what informs my vision for the future. I do want to take you through a little bit of my history, which is kind of a series of unfortunate events that leads me to you guys today. 20 years ago, I left Utah to move to Chicago to work for a little company called Arthur Andersen. Does anybody remember Arthur Andersen? Anybody work for Arthur Andersen? Awesome. Okay, this is going to be good. So when I was working on my master's degree at BYU to put food on the table, I started a little software company, and by little I mean we had one customer. All right, we're going to try this again. It works. We're good. So I built a little software company to do construction management. So basically for home builders to track job costs. The really cool feature was that it worked on Windows. Most of the construction management packages back then were green screen, DOS. I mean, they were just terrible. And our little feature that was super cool was we built automatic reporting to banks to do your construction draws. Right, so any of you out there in the construction business knows that this is one of the most tedious processes, is all that work to get the construction draws. So a friend of mine and I who worked on this together, we pitched it at a entrepreneurial competition down at BYU, loads of angel investors. We won second place. First place was a young man who had a better idea for selling aluminum siding. To this day, I'm still tweaked about that. I don't know how I lost to somebody who literally their idea was a better way to sell aluminum siding. One outcome of that was an angel investor who offered to fund us, to actually get going. I was scared to death. I decided I needed a very secure future, and so I went with the most respected name in public accounting, Arthur Andersen, and I moved to Chicago. That's an inside joke for those of us who remember the Arthur Andersen days. I wasn't at Arthur Andersen very long before realizing that I just didn't fit in there. It just wasn't a great place for me. So 2 years in, going against every conservative bone in my body that says you've got a secure future here with Arthur Andersen, I picked up my family and I moved to Silicon Valley to help start a company called Intacct. So that was about 18 and a half years ago, right around 2000. When we started the company, .com was in mania mode. venture capitalists had more money to invest than good ideas to invest in. You didn't need revenue to attract money. All you needed was an idea and a website right behind it. So we closed our first round of funding, $10 million, March 21st, 2000. Does anybody remember what happened March 21st, 2000? That was the day the NASDAQ crashed. So while we were simultaneously watching to see the wires come into the bank from the venture capitalists, we were also watching the NASDAQ drop. I think it dropped something like 15%, in one day. So what's interesting about that is it forced us to behave like a real startup, right? It forced us to think, well, we actually need to have some revenues here. We actually need to build a company that will last. When we started the thing, we thought it was 2 years to IPO, 5 years to retire to a desert island. Well, here I am in front of you 19 years later. We've got a real business now. So we did end up, after lots of ups and downs, selling the company about a year ago. Anybody use a Sage product or familiar with Sage software? So Sage is one of the large, actually I think they're the largest software company in the UK, and they're totally focused on accounting and finance. I got to know the leadership team at Sage throughout my career at Intacct. They first tried to buy the company in 2004. They offered us, I'm not going to tell you the exact number, they offered us single-digit millions for the company, and we turned them down. We thought it was worth way more than that. They ended up paying $850 million for us last year, which the money was great, but also the story is great, right? That they weren't willing to pay more than a couple $1 million. And as we progressed the business, we were able to sell it for quite a bit more. So that's my story. I run the technology shop, I run the engineering shop. It's my job to hopefully see the future enough to make good decisions about where technology can take the industry. And I'll tell you honestly that 50% of our success was being smart, and 50% of it was being ignorant. When we built the product back in 2000, we had no idea what multi-tenancy was, but that's how we designed our product because it just seemed like the right thing to do. We looked at some of the concepts for the way general ledger packages worked at the time, and we thought we didn't like that, and we came up with entirely new ways that some worked out pretty well. Ideas like a multi-dimensional general ledger. Okay, so what I want to do today is not just take you through artificial intelligence and machine learning. These are critical, and I am going to talk about those. But I actually think we're in a period of time where there's a number of technology trends that are going to completely disrupt the future of accounting technology. AI and machine learning is just one of them. There's actually several of them. So I want to take you through what those are, sort of how they work together, some examples of, I think, how it's going to affect your businesses and your finance teams, and hopefully inspire you to think about some things that are coming down the road and what you can do with them. So I want to start off with a premise that we use as the starting point for all of our stories, about the company and why we started it. This was one of Peter Drucker's last presentations that he gave, maybe his last ones, and he stood before an audience of executives and said, nobody knows more about your business than your CFO knows about your business. I mean, that's kind of awful, isn't it? This was in '99, by the way, right around the time we started the company. And frankly, he has a really good point. And the reason for that is, in my observations, and I think a lot of people will recognize this, CFOs are spending way too much time simply getting to a point where they can verify the past. That's what it's all about. What are the two most important activities that you and your team go through on a periodic basis? Your close and your audit, right? What's the purpose of the close? It's to get to a point, usually weeks after all the results, actually the real transactions have happened, where you can actually report the numbers. What's the point of the audit? The point of the audit is to give some confidence that the numbers were actually right. And that audit comes, after the fact. And this is what you spend, a lot of your time. Whether it's, in the weeds doing it yourself or trying to figure out ways to get your organizations to be more efficient at doing this. And our premise is that the technology of the last generation of accounting software has been holding you back. Some examples of that, because this last generation of technology was designed on computers that had limited computing power, they had limited memory, the developers had to come up with concepts like batches. Right? This idea that if I'm doing a load of operational transactions, whether it's from a POS system or from an e-commerce system or whatever, the only real efficient way to get that into the accounting system is to batch it up and summarize it. Right? So, it's latent, you lose all the details, right? You're only getting exactly what you need to do your basic financial reporting. Your teams are completely focused on getting your close done. You want to go from 3 weeks to 1 week. Is a common refrain. Maybe those aren't the exact numbers. You have software that you've implemented where you have multiple locations running different instances or even different versions of the software. We do really well in the financial services industry for organizations like real estate investment trusts, family offices, wealth management. They're making the transition to the cloud right now, but before Sage Intacct, they would have an instance of QuickBooks for every one of their investments, right? If they had a charity, if they had a production company, if they had, they would all be on a different instance of QuickBooks, and to get any information whatsoever, they'd have to export, consolidate, and run some basic reports. It just doesn't work, right? And so what I'm saying to the CFOs and the finance leaders of the world is that you're stuck because the technology is holding you back. And our belief, and I think this is why you probably all got into the industry, is that you should be the strategic leaders. You're the ones that understand the business better than anybody else. You've got the insights, you can read the numbers, and you can actually help the organization to be successful, right? To take advantage of opportunities and to avoid the risks in the future. So we see 3 steps to completing this transformation. It's really straightforward. And I do want to call out that these are aspirational. I'm not standing in front of you telling you that you don't need to do a close anymore. I get that it's an iterative process. We're going to get there. It's sort of an asymptotic thing. But every single prospect that I talk to that's looking to make a change, number one objective, how do I get my close done faster? And our argument is, why do we have to have a close? Why can't we get to a point where the books always have all the numbers reliably in real time for you to report on? The second piece of this is continuous audit. It's sort of a similar thought. Why do you have to wait until the auditors come decamp in your office and sample your transactions to have some sense of the reliability of the numbers coming out of the system? There's no reason why we can't actually convert that into a continuous activity. And then lastly, predictive analytics. And this gets to the heart of what we think is the big limitation of the last generation of accounting software, that the conventional wisdom was the job was to do basic financial reporting, right? You've got to be able to do a GAAP income statement, a GAAP balance sheet, a GAAP statement of cash flows. By the way, building the GAAP statement of cash flows in Intacct was the hardest thing we ever did. That's the real litmus test for an accounting package, is how well they do the statement of cash flows. But that's basic. It provides almost no value to you, to the other executives in your organization, to the board of directors. It's simply a reconciliation of cash. What value do you get out of the statement of cash flows? But that was the conventional wisdom. You would have to go to a BI tool, to an analytics product, to a Hyperion, Adaptive Insights, and the list goes on, to actually get any meaningful value from the information that's coming into your accounting system. So our belief is, and we'll get into this, is that while there is value in those third-party analytics products, we want you and your team to have analytics embedded in the transactional system of record. You shouldn't have to go to a third-party system to get intelligence. So let me take you through what we see as the technology trends that are driving this. Some of these are going to be obvious to you. The first, I think, isn't. But I think it's the most important. So the first of these is what I call unlimited computing power. When you talk about things like robotic process automation, when you talk about machine learning and what it can do, none of that is possible when you're constrained by the availability of computing resources. So this idea of multi-tenancy and the unlimited computing power that comes from it unlocks much of what's coming in the future. So it makes artificial intelligence, it powers analytics everywhere, which we'll talk about. The conventional wisdom was you set up your transactional system and optimize it for processing transactions, which is suboptimal for actually doing analytics. So you've got to move the data somewhere else. You've got to rejigger it. You've got to change everything so that it works for analytics. Right? That's the conventional wisdom that doesn't understand unlimited computing power. Right? So number two is embedded analytics. The idea that every product you use in the future is going to have analytics embedded in real time. AI and machine learning, that's why we're here. We will talk about that. And then lastly, blockchain. I'm not sure where blockchain is on the hype curve. I think maybe we've jumped the shark a little bit and we're getting into that trough of disillusionment. Anybody here, thinking a lot about blockchain? Do you guys know? Raise your hand if you're familiar with blockchain. Okay, all right. So you guys know what I'm talking about here. So I want to take you through these four, share some thoughts with you, and share with you how I think it's really going to shape the future of accounting and finance and the technology that's available to you. So, unlimited computing power. Let's just quickly go through the evolution here. There's a key, the key part of this slide is that last pillar. Right, so some of you are still running on mini computers. I met at least one of you this morning that has to use a mini computer, right? But the era of the mainframe, right, the idea was for the first time we were able to automate repetitive work. It was incredibly expensive. Most companies couldn't afford it. And every user had to have a specialized terminal to access the system, right? Big step forward, but terrible by today's standards, right? We then moved to client server, which really made accounting technology affordable and accessible to the masses, right? It was the first time where we could actually get that capability to all businesses of all sizes. But the power or the control was with IT, even though accounting and finance was the user. So there was this massive dependency. And if you had to do any customizations to make it work for your business, you were sort of screwed when it came time for the upgrade. How many of you are running on old versions of a Microsoft product or a Sage on-premise product? Don't be shy. None of you? You're all on the cloud. Okay, I'm just going to go with you won't admit it, because I still believe this. Right, we all know that client server is on that path. Well, the next step in this evolution was what we call hosted or single instance cloud. Right, so these are the Microsoft products like Navision or Solomon or GP that somebody's putting up in a data center and putting a web front end on for you. That's going to be true of some Sage products. There's a long tail of these applications that were really designed to be client-server apps, but they've sort of morphed into the cloud, right? The fundamental designs haven't changed. You can just access them from a browser now. They're still limited in a lot of ways. Sure, you don't have to worry about managing the servers. You don't have to worry about software upgrades on the servers themselves, but you're still stuck if you did massive customizations to it. You can't get the next version. You're still dependent on IT. And you don't get a lot of the benefit that you get from the multi-tenant cloud. Right, so the idea of the multi-tenant cloud is that all customers share a common pool of resources. That's really, really critical. Right? So you build this massive pool of computing capability, and you make that available to all customers simultaneously. And it fundamentally changes everything about the way you design software, which I'll get into in a minute. But you get the benefit of rapid innovation cycles. Cloud providers on a multi-tenant platform release software 3-4 times a year. We actually release every week. Every week, Wednesday night, customers don't even know it's happening. We move every customer to a new version of the software. Right? It enables an incredible pace of delivery of new features, and all customers are always on the same version, and it's not their job. Right? You don't have to think about the upgrade process. You have nothing to do with it. It's our job to make sure that it's completely seamless to you. So there have been challenges over the years in getting people to accept the cloud When we first started the business, we had a really tough time getting people to trust us, to put their data onto the web. They were happy using banking applications at the time. I don't know why, and putting their money in the bank, but they weren't willing to trust us. So we had a really clever idea. We actually put a button into the application called See My Data. And when you clicked that button, it would actually launch a webcam. We had a camera in the data center pointing at the servers. It was a stupid gimmick. But it provided some comfort. I would argue if you were a buyer who needed that comfort, you weren't ready for our product. But we did it anyway, and it actually elicited some really interesting stories. It lasted maybe 6 months. This is not the real story of what happened. The real story of what happened is kind of PG. We had one of our data center sysadmins was in there working, and he should have been wearing a belt. And he wasn't wearing a belt, and he was bent over, and a little more of him was showing than we wanted to be showing, and that was public, on the webcam for all of our applications. It ran its course, right? It was a simple solution to a problem that we faced back in the early days, which was people didn't feel comfortable if they couldn't see the server, right? If they didn't know where their data was, if they couldn't go snatch it and run off with it. I think we've really moved past that, but you really don't get the full benefit of the security that we can provide now without that move to the multi-tenant cloud. And what I want to do is sort of take you through an analogy that's really, really cheesy. And I apologize for just how cheesy this analogy is, but bear with me a little bit. Right, so these software vendors that had the GP or the Dynamics range of products and some of the older Sage line of products, the whole industry developed of taking the server out of your business and sticking it into a data center and putting Citrix in front of it or putting a browser front end in front of it, and that solved some of the problem. This was hard for people to give up because, and the analogy here is that server that was sitting in your closet is like, I can't remember how I did my builds here, this power generator. 20 years ago when I was living down in Utah, we had a cabin. I didn't personally. Relatives had a cabin up in Fairview Canyon. And this power generator was the most important thing that we owned. Colder up there at nights even than it was this morning. I know you guys are used to this cold. I mean, it was miserable walking out of my hotel this morning. But imagine, when this thing's not working. Right, so this thing provides a lot of comfort in much the same way that your on-premise software provides some comfort. You can see it. You can put gas in it, right? You can maintain it yourself, right? If it's not working, if it's not available, you go put gas in it. If you figure out what's going on. But of course, you need to actually understand a little bit about how these things work. If it's two-stroke, you've got to mix the gas and the oil. If it breaks down, you can repair it as long as you know small engine repair, or you can take it to a repair shop. No one's going to steal it from you because you can see it. Ignore for the fact that there's wheels on it. If you need more power, you just buy a bigger generator, or you borrow the neighbor's. And so the idea of hosted client-server applications was, let's take that generator from your backyard, or let's take that server from your closet, and let's put it into a data center where you can't see it anymore, and we'll run electricity to your business. Right? That's basically the premise for hosted applications or for single instance cloud applications. And so, these providers were literally just stacking up the generators in their warehouse and hoping nothing would happen. Well, imagine how horrible this is when there are changes required to provide a better service to the customer. So, back to this analogy, which I know I'm beating this analogy to death, so apologies. Can that vendor who is hosting your on-prem product get you more power if your business needs grow? Right? It's not so simple. You've got to go buy new hardware. In this case, in the analogy, you've got to go buy a bigger generator. What if there's a change in requirements where you've got to go from 110 to 220? Can the vendor make that change for you without you having to worry about it? What if the laws change and you've got to go from gas to ethanol? I don't know. All right, so there's all these complexities that come when you take what was designed to run on premise, when something that was designed to be local, and you stick it in the cloud, right? It doesn't solve all the problems. All it does is take away your ability to see it and manage it yourself. So, by the way, Amazon is a great website for going to get pictures of generators. So after the first time I put the slide deck together, now every single time I go to Amazon, they're trying to sell me generators. So AI is not that smart yet. Okay, yeah, slow build here. This was really, by the way, no marketing helped me creating this slide deck. Come on. All right, so that's the third pillar in that chart. Hosted or single tenant applications, right? This is, let me come back to that. We're going to come back to this. This is what we're trying to build, right? We're trying to build that massive, scalable, reliable power plant, right? That everybody can plug into and just not have to worry about things. So, and there's always a question about economics, about reliability, but when you look at that power plant, there's enough reliability for hospitals, enough security for banks, right? It's got adequate power from a small business or a single family to large industry, right? It's got massive redundancy, and an overlooked benefit is the economies of scale. Simple math is that if you're trying to power your home through a generator, it's 45 cents a kilowatt, 46 cents a kilowatt. My power bill in Dallas for my home there is 7 cents a kilowatt, right? That's the benefit of economies of scale. So long drawn out analogy, but what this does is it enables us as the creator of a multi-tenant cloud product to make unlimited computing power available to our clients, and to radically change the way we design the software. When you no longer have to think about, is it going to perform? Can we handle that volume? Suddenly, you build features that you weren't willing to build before. And I would argue that even many vendors who have adopted this technology still haven't changed the way they think. It's a constant challenge for me to remind my team that performance isn't a first consideration. Yes, it needs to perform, but don't worry about it because we have unlimited computing power. We can make it perform. So it's just what our data center looks like for our primary instance. We have over 10,000 CPUs available to provide the service. We're running on over 100 terabytes of RAM, not gigabytes, terabytes of RAM. On a given day, we'll process 100 million requests through the system on behalf of our customers, 1 billion API calls a month. So that's integrations with third-party systems, e-commerce transactions coming in, sales orders coming in from Salesforce, right? We do 1 billion of those a month. And we're currently managing over 50 billion financial transactions, right? So in the aggregate, in this multi-tenant cloud instance, is enormous computing power driving enormous scale across a very large set of customers. And it's not just, do we make things fast? It's also, can we manage workflows? So while you have your sales orders coming in from your e-commerce suite, and while you have your team running your month-end reports, and your auditor just asked for a 10,000-page GL detail report or something, right? We can balance all of that power to support all of those activities simultaneously. So when that user accidentally runs that enormous report, in the old world, it brings down the system. You've got to kill it, or you can't process transactions. It sort of happens completely oblivious to the rest of the business. So that's part of the power. So this is sort of a long, drawn-out way of saying that the future of accounting technology is going to be radically changed by this idea that we're no longer constrained. We can build whatever we want now because there's no fear that we can power it. So I'll take you through some examples in a minute, but some high-level talking points about that. So it's enough scalability to capture every transaction that happens in your business, not just summary, right? And capture the transactions in real time, and don't just capture the debits, the credits, and the GAAP accounts. Capture everything about the transaction, even if it doesn't have any impact on the GAAP outcome for the business. It provides effortless elasticity. That elasticity word is really, really important. Any of you have seasonal businesses? So we have a customer in Chicago who sells school supplies. Right, that's their entire business. They do 95% of all their business in 2 weeks of the year. And during those 2 weeks, they can process up to 250,000 transactions per hour. Right, so imagine the old world, and you're the head of IT, and you're in the months heading up to the new school year, and it's your job to make sure that nothing goes wrong in those 2 weeks. You can't be down for an hour, right? If you're down for an hour, you're losing percentages of revenue. And worse than that, you've got to prepare by spending tons of money on capacity that's going to sit idle for 50 months of the year. Right? So now that this customer's in the multi-tenant cloud, they don't even think about it, right? It magically happens. They go from using a small amount of the overall capacity to using a bigger amount of the overall capacity, but they never even have to think about it. Zero latency analytics. You don't have to wait to move your data into your data warehouse or into some reporting database. You don't have to go through that data transformation process. Your data is always there, it's always live, it's always ready to be reported on when you're not afraid of computing power. And then lastly, and this sort of gets into the future, you need a lot of data to train machines, right? The more data available to train the machine, the smarter the machine becomes. The fact that we have now 50 billion transactions in our databases allows us to train artificial intelligence to be incredibly smart, to really find those insights in the data, to find the anomalies with high degrees of accuracy, so that unlimited computing power is required for this evolution of artificial intelligence that's coming. So, a couple examples here of the way we've already changed the way accounting systems work. So think about if any of you are global operations, you've got multiple divisions or business units, maybe you've got some overseas locations. In the last generation, every new business unit, if you acquired a new business, if you reorganized, required a full implementation. Sometimes it meant installing a new instance of the software and configuring it. Our belief is that no matter how large your global organization is, we have customers literally with thousands of business units operating in dozens of countries that are doing 1 million transactions a day. They're all in a single implementation. So when they add a new business unit, when they make that acquisition, it's literally clicks through a wizard to add that new business unit to the system. What happens with all your inter-entity transactions when you've got siloed implementations across your business units? Maybe you've created some process to automate that, but if everything's running in the same instance, the software can do it for you, right? The software can see when there's a transaction that affects multiple entities and handle the inter-entity for you. So it becomes automated. What about cross-entity reporting? What if you're a distributed organization, but you have a common vendor list, and you want to produce an aging report for that common vendor list? And what if you're global and some of your businesses track aging in Canadian dollars and some track in US dollars? How hard is it to produce a basic aging statement for a vendor in that scenario? We have a customer in the Northeast, very famous man. His family office runs on Intacct. He's worth just shy of $20 billion. He went from 85 individual QuickBooks instances to a single instance of Intacct. And one of the challenges was it was impossible to get any information from across his organizations. Right? If he's got a vendor that supplies lighting to a couple of his production companies, but he's also used that for some marketing campaign for one of his charities, and he wants to know how much have we spent on this vendor. The way it worked before moving to the multi-tenant cloud was go spin up all the QuickBooks, right, where you might have used this vendor, make sure that they all use the same name, right, same ID, that spit out the transactions, reconcile it. And so when this very famous hedge fund billionaire asked his controller of his family office, how much have I spent on this vendor, it would take her weeks to get him the answer. After implementing Sage Intacct, It took minutes. And she actually delayed getting the answer back to him because she was worried he wouldn't believe it, right? That he could actually get the answer to her that fast. And it's not magic, right? It's not like, there's some black magic in figuring out how to do that. It's the simple fact that all the businesses are running in a single instance, right? And you no longer have to go through that. Consolidations were painful, obviously, when you've got multiple instances. And not only are they painful, but they're not timely, right? So if you need up-to-the-minute performance information, you have to wait. Okay, so another example here, old GL versus new GL. In the old GL, any of your subledger transactions, any transactions coming from other systems, they would come in after the fact. We want you to bring them in real time now. We can handle it. They would come in highly summarized with just enough information to produce your GAAP financial statements. We want you to bring in all the details now per transaction. I need to fix this build for the next presentation I give. It's a little tedious. Basic GAAP versus powerful performance. And then, the last example is this idea of interactive analytics, right? The old way was you had to go buy special purpose software. The new way is you already own the software, you've already implemented it, there's nothing new to do, right? The old way was, use an ETL product or hire a developer to move the data to the other system. You don't have to do anything. It's already there and it's live. You had to go build special purpose data models. You guys understand snowflake schema and star schema and OLAP cubes, right? The answer is no, and you shouldn't have to, right? But that's the old model, right? The old model is to get to any powerful analytics, you had to have some specialized IT staff that understood star schema, snowflake schema, OLAP cubes, that could come in and actually create the system that would do this. This isn't your problem. Computing power takes care of all that. Who cares if the data is stored in the database in a way that's not the most optimized for reporting? We've got the horsepower to blast through it anyway, right? We don't need those special data cubes. In the old way, you had security problems. You guys go through so much effort to put all your controls in place in your ERP system, to define your roles, to figure out exactly who has rights to what data and what processes, and then you go and you lift all that data and you put it into a data warehouse. How do you secure the data with the same discipline that you did your ERP? The answer is, in most cases, you don't. And so what happens is you actually limit the audience. You say, you know what, it's really sensitive what's in that database, so I'm only going to allow a couple privileged people to use it, right? So it's incredibly limiting. And of course, there's no drill down. There's no context, right? You can see the answer, but you can't see the reason behind the answer. You can't go down to the source transactions. So, I probably spent a disproportionate time on this idea of unlimited computing power, but what I'm trying to convey is that it's what unlocks everything else. Everything else that comes is made possible by this. So, analytics everywhere. We've talked about this. I'm not going to rehash it. And by the way, there are some amazing BI products out there, and you should be using them. All right? You have lots of data sources all over your businesses. There's lots of value in that data. Our argument is that as a CFO, you shouldn't have to go to that product to understand your revenue. Right? You shouldn't have to go to that product to understand which of your products are performing the best, because all that data is live in your transactional system of record. All right, so we talked about the latency of the data, we talked about security, the lack of drill down, the fact that it requires IT. You're not empowered as soon as you have to go to that third-party product. So we're actually pretty close. I apologize for another screenshot of the product, but we're pretty close to launching a new embedded analytics product. And the idea here is that you and your team need really powerful tools for building reports and getting through your close and getting through your audits. And you actually want the CFO or the CEO or the head of marketing to be able to answer their own questions, right? And the way to do that is to give them an environment where they can play with the data and interact with the data and find the answers in a really, really easy to use format. So that's coming. All right, finally getting to the topic of this session, AI and machine learning. Today, in our product, because we know with certainty how the product is used, we know that roughly 70% of all of the transactional work in the system is done automatically, meaning they've set up a repetitive process using our tools. There's an API, right? Something has taken the repetitive work away from the human, and the machine is doing it. Still 30% is happening through humans, right? And the best hope we have to fight against that 30% is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I want to take you through some scenarios that are driving the way we think about it. They're pretty high level, but then I'm going to get into a sort of a storyboard to give you an idea what it might look like in an accounting product with full AI capabilities embedded into it. So number one is anomaly detection. What do you really do? You spend 80% of your time reviewing the 20%, it's probably 90-10, right? You're looking for exceptions. You're not reviewing every journal entry that comes through the system. You're looking for the exceptional transactions, and they pay you the big bucks because you know the right accounting treatment, or the right way to handle this kind of transaction to the best benefit. So you deal with exceptions. Exceptions are by definition anomalies. Right? And the way you find those anomalies today is you have reports, you've got memorized searches, you create your lists of things. We believe that we can, by the power of unlimited computing, have AI looking at every transaction in real time, looking for anomalies. Right? An anomaly might be a transaction that got coded incorrectly. You've got some junior staff accountant that mistakenly credited expense and debited accounts payable. I don't know, maybe that's right. You've got a transaction where that's a correct journal entry, but AI, by actually finding patterns in the data, finding outliers, can immediately flag, hey, something's wrong with this transaction. It seems kind of weird to me, this combination of debits and credits. Or maybe it's weird to me that you just hit a sales commission account for the HR department, right? That's weird too. Right, so AI can find that for you. It also has access to more than just the transactional data. It's got access to how the system is being used. It can also detect fraud. Right, so imagine that the way I use the system every week is that I go in and I create vendors. And I do it from San Jose, California. Now imagine that an hour after the last vendor I created from California, I created a customer from London, England. There's a big red flag, right? There's potential fraud. Maybe somebody has stolen my account and wants to perpetuate some fraudulent activity. So we can use anomaly detection to do that. So we talked about continuous security, recommender systems. As finance leaders, you don't have one activity that you do repetitively in the system. You're not going in and doing the same thing over and over again. You're going in and doing those things that you know are the most important to the business. So the products of the future will learn your behavior, will learn where you like to spend your time, and will start to recommend to you what you might do. So if you spend your time looking at software contracts over some dollar amount, when you log in the next time, hey, let's point you that a new contract came in that you might want to look at. Right? We can actually make you more effective by predicting what you want to do in the system. Intelligent assistants. Now, I have some mixed feelings on this, right? This is the chatbot thing. I'm not a big fan of chatbots. I personally think the real value of digital assistants is to allow users who wouldn't otherwise log into the system to get value from the system, right? It's having your CEO ask Siri, what was the top customer by revenue, or what's the cash balance, right? That's the real power, I think, of digital assistants. Okay, and then continuous trend monitoring. So this is where we get into seeing the future. So now that you're bringing in all this data in real time, and it's not just your basic GAAP data, we can enrich that data with other data. Maybe we're bringing in all the exchange rates, we're bringing in market results, we're bringing in economic indicators, we're bringing in weather forecasts. When you combine all of that together with your financial results, you can spot very rich trends, and you can start to predict when opportunities or threats might face you. I need to do a time check here. When do I need to stop? Now? Huh? Okay, yeah, I'm going to go through 5-10 minutes fast here. Okay, so who knows who Petroli is? This crowd should know who Petroli is. So Petroli was a Franciscan friar. He's the inventor of double entry accounting. When we decided that we needed to add artificial intelligence capabilities to our product, we wanted to create a persona that was relatable to our users, right? So we came up with this guy. I'll tell you that we came up with this guy before we got acquired by Sage. Sage is a very global organization, and while we can trademark him in the US, we can't get the trademark in Europe. So I'm obligated to tell you that this is internal code. I'm open to suggestions for a better persona to represent our AI. This was perfect. I was so happy when I came up with this. But the idea, right, is that we can bring Petroli back, make Petroli a virtual member of your accounting staff, and this persona that is omniscient, right, that sees everything happening in real time, and can take away a lot of that capability that you were relying on reports and searches to do. So, the story is, so here's sort of a mock-up of what a product might look like that's driven by artificial intelligence, right? So from time to time, Petroli, because Petroli is in real time monitoring everything that's happening in the system, Petroli may prompt you to review something that's happened in the system, right? So you might get a real-time notification, in the product, right? So here Petroli's popping up and saying, hey, there was a revenue recognition schedule created for this customer that looks weird to me. You might want to take a look at it. And Petroli's going to give you some context, give you a link where you can go look at the details, but also you can also give feedback to Petroli. Say, hey, you know what? I don't really care about that. Or this is really valuable. Like, make the machine smarter. So Petroli can keep an eye out for anomalous transactions, irregular transactions, things that might raise fraud flags, but also things that might be interesting to you based on your history. And when we do that, we can actually adjust the way the product works for you, right? So the old concept of menus and bookmarks and searches, it's still there, but it's less prominent. More prominent is, here's where we think you might want to spend your time today, and here's links to go look at all that activity. And this is where the real power comes in from AI. It's finding those insights. So we've got a number of patents that we filed for the capabilities we're building here. But the one that I'm most excited about is the idea that as we watch the way you interact with the system, we can start to learn what you care about, right? So if your business is long-term care facilities, I'm going to learn that what you really care about is patient per day, or revenue per patient day, right? That is your metric. If you're a software company, you care about net change and CMRR, right? That's what you care about. If you're in the construction business, maybe it's margin on a key job code, right? But we're going to learn by the way that you interact with the system what you care about. And once we learn that, we can actually figure out what are the inputs to the system that affect that, right? So if it's revenue per patient day, what sorts of transactions actually affect that KPI? And let's now start watching those in real time. And as we watch those in real time, we start to see the trends, right? You do your basic statistical trend analysis. You can fit a curve to it. And as soon as we see that something changes in that trend, your cash balance had a nice curve to it accelerating up, and it just flattened out. Your net change in contracted monthly recurring revenue usually spikes at the end of a period, and it didn't spike at the end of this period. So that is a change in the trend. And we can spot that and notify you in real time. And because we know the inputs that are driving the changes in those trends, we can actually decompose it to you. So if we show you that you've got a risk for renewals revenue, and you follow Petroli's prompt to go look at it, Petroli's actually going to tell you in rank order what were the factors that affected that. Right? This, in my mind, is the real power of artificial intelligence. Yes, automating the work that's done repetitively by humans is valuable. Yes, finding a potential fraud, irregularities is valuable. Making you more efficient is valuable. What's really valuable is helping you to course correct, right? When you have the opportunity, right? make sure that renewal comes in. Make sure that you swap vendors if you're not getting the margin that you need somewhere. Okay, blockchain in 2 minutes, maybe 3. So you guys all know Bitcoin, right? Any Bitcoin investors that haven't committed suicide out there? I almost decided to buy some Bitcoins in December. I decided I was a little too afraid, so it's dropped what? It's probably too emotional to even talk about with some of you. But Bitcoin is the genesis of the blockchain. And I'm not here to tell you how awful and amazing Bitcoin is. But I will tell you that the technology behind Bitcoin is literally civilization changing. And I really do mean that. When I first started researching blockchain, I thought it was a solution looking for a problem. I didn't really see the value. I'm going to skip through a bunch of, I got some funny stuff in here about Bitcoin. If I had time to go through these, the punchline would be, it takes more electricity to resolve to process a single Bitcoin transaction than it does to power my house for a week. And it can only handle 7 transactions a second. So really, really promising technology that's a long way off from meaningful adoption in ways that are going to make changes. Uzbekistan, that's the country in rank order of electricity consumption that matches the electricity consumption of the Bitcoin network. Anyway, it's got a long ways to go, right, before it can be mainstream. But there are some things about blockchain that are incredibly powerful and disruptive and that are going to happen in accounting, right? So the idea that I can have a decentralized ledger, so think about all your subledgers, right? Your vendor subledger, your customer subledger, right? You've got auditors that come in, look at those subledgers to try to figure out if it's actually accurate. I'm going to go interview a sample of customers to find out if you really have those contracts. I'm going to go interview a sample of vendors, to make sure that your ledger matches, right, what's really happening. With a decentralized ledger, you and your vendor, you and your customer already agree. And it's already encoded in an immutable way on the blockchain, and it can't be tampered with, right? The auditor no longer has to audit your subledger. So when you take that concept, you can apply it to things like, currencies, things like voting, things like the food chain, and really, and this is where I get to that point, changing civilization. So Hyperledger, by the way, if you have a chance, go look up Hyperledger. It's a kind of a promising initiative that's driven by IBM that takes the concept of blockchain and applies it to business, to politics, and really interesting and useful ways. But some examples here of where blockchain is literally changing civilization. SWIFT, right? Any of you who have to do foreign currency transactions, right, or send money to a foreign country, you're probably using the SWIFT network. And the SWIFT network is a mess. I actually don't know that I believe these numbers. It did come from a reliable source, but they're so bad as to be not believable. But according to the source, up to 12.7% of SWIFT transactions, have some issues with them, and that there's a $1.6 trillion opportunity to optimize the SWIFT network. Well, so they did do a POC with the Hyperledger, and they found that they were able to eliminate all the reconciliation issues with foreign transactions. They were able to provide instant audit, instant status of where something is in the network. Literally game-changing. Life-saving. So, what happens, I don't want to pick on Chipotle, but it's the best example. I hope I don't have any Chipotle customers in the crowd here. I love Chipotle, but they have been in the news a couple times for food poisoning, right? Probably not their fault, actually. Probably it happened somewhere in the supply chain getting to Chipotle. Well, people die when there's a problem in the food supply chain. And what happens when there's an issue is you've got to go back and you've got to trace the supply chain to find the source. Once you find the source, you've got to find out all the distribution endpoints for that, right, so that you can minimize the health impact. Now, if this were all managed on a blockchain, you would have instant reconciliation from the individual location that had the bad lettuce, down to the supplier of the farm that supplied that lettuce. And maybe it wasn't that farm, maybe it was a distributor in between, but it's now instant, right? And it's available to everybody in the supply chain. So Walmart has already done this. They already have worked with IBM to create a blockchain for tracking the food supply. And there's enough potential benefit that suppliers like Unilever, Dole, Nestle, they've already signed on, right? The opportunity is so huge that people are moving fast to adopt it. The last example is democracy. So when I said civilization changing, we've got this rising tide of autocratic leaders, especially in Eastern Europe, which is really troubling because there was such a great story of the flourishing democracies in Eastern Europe. And so we've got this risk now that we're going to revert to some of the troubled days of the past. And so how, as an autocrat, do you make sure you maintain power? Well, one of those ways is by tampering with the elections, right? I can't help with intimidation. I can't help with fake news. But what blockchain can help with is the validity of the voting results, the integrity of the system that captures each voter's preference. Right, so Poland is already running a POC to actually convert their voting system onto a blockchain, so that once that vote is cast, there is 100% confidence, through the mutual trust of the system that the votes are accurate. Okay, what this means for you in the future, your subledgers are going to be blockchains. I don't know if it's going to be 3 years or 10 years, but your subledgers are going to be blockchains. Vendors like Sage Intacct, Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, we will all be investing in blockchains to allow you to define those networks, whether it's with your customers, with your vendors. I can't finish the conversation without talking about robotic process automation. So I have conflicting views on this. So my high-level thesis on robotic process automation is that it's technology aimed at extending the shelf life of all the old crap we're doing today, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong, right? I mean, if you've got an army of people that start their day by getting a box of forms, right? Whether it's invoices, employment applications, whatever, and then they take all those forms and they code them into a system. Right? And they take the information from that system and they put it into another system, and then they trigger, permissions and whatnot, and that's all they do all day long. And you're not doing it here in Utah because it's too expensive to hire people to do that routine work. It's being offshored somewhere. That's where robotic process automation comes in. It's the idea that I can take that unlimited computing power. Sorry to keep bringing that back, but I can use that unlimited computing power. I can use artificial intelligence. I can use things like screen scraping. Literally, what this technology does is it automates clicks and data entry in the products that you're already using. So, part of the reason I'm conflicted is that at Sage Intacct, we actually defend against that. We actually have technology in our user interface to block robots from using the system because we think that's just horrible. We have APIs for that. We have tools for automating. So in my mind, right, it reflects that we still have a long ways to go on this journey. But I will tell you that in the short term, if you're looking for ways to improve the efficiency of your organizations, robotic process automation is your best bet. There are a lot of companies, not a lot, there are several standout companies right now that are doing some really cool things with robotic process automation. That really can have the ability to add tremendous efficiencies to what you do. Now, my worry is it'll keep you on those old products, right? Because you've automated around all their deficiencies. But it's here whether I like it or not, and it's going to have a huge impact on the industry. So I'll skip this. I talked about that. So that's it, right? That's the vision. The vision is we can get you out of your month-end close. All right, we can make it a fully automated, fully continuous thing. My vision is to get to a point where nobody's asking anymore, how can I make the close faster? The close is irrelevant. You're always closed. We want to take the value of the audit and actually enhance it by making it continuous, right? Catch in real time the opportunities to course correct as opposed to finding out when it's too late. And then lastly, give you the tools to actually take all that information and make better decisions for your organizations, whether it's finding better opportunities or avoiding the threats that are out there. So that's it for me. Thanks for letting me take, I think, more than my allotted time this morning. Sorry about that. I don't know if we have time for questions. I'll be around if anybody wants to talk to me. That's it. Thank you.